In the summer of 1993, 12 teenage girls, gifted dancers from across the country, vanished during an elite arts retreat in rural Oregon. No bodies, no clues. Only a rusted van left behind, buried deep in the woods with the engine still warm. For 31 years, their case went cold, forgotten by the system, grieved in silence by the families. But in 2024, everything changed, when a local sheriff stumbled upon a hidden underground chamber and uncovered a truth more terrifying than anyone imagined. This isn't just a story about missing children. It's about a secret program, a weaponized rhythm, and a generation taught to forget who they are, until one woman listened and made the silence break. The morning light filtered through the towering pines of the Cascade foothills, soft and amber, like it had always known how to keep secrets. At 6:47 a.m., the crew foreman of a road expansion project leaned over a rusted piece of metal just unearthed from the ridge near the old Eaglewood Reserve. He'd thought at first it was a drainage pipe, until he saw the license plate. Oregon state issue, faded but intact, and the color, sun-bleached but unmistakable. School van yellow. The call to the sheriff's office came 3 minutes later. Claire Monroe was already awake when it came through. She always was these days. The silence in her house had grown thick over the years, too quiet to be accidental. She stared at the notification on her phone for a long moment, her coffee cooling on the counter beside her. Van found. Possibly buried. Matching description from 1993 disappearance. Coordinates. Eaglewood Ridge. The mug slipped slightly in her grip, and she caught it with a reflex that surprised her. The name, Eaglewood, should have felt dusty, but it bloomed in her chest like something freshly torn. She was supposed to be on that van. 31 years ago, 12 teenage girls, students from the prestigious Cascade Youth Performing Arts Conservatory, had boarded a school van headed to a summer retreat in the mountains. Claire had been the 13th, but a fractured ankle from a last-minute rehearsal accident had kept her home. The others never came back. No wreckage, no bodies. Just vanished into Oregon's deep green silence. She drove the familiar road slowly, cautiously, as if the trees might reach out and stop her. It had been so long, and yet the forest looked untouched, unnervingly identical. When she arrived, the area had been taped off, the pine needles scattered with boots and machinery tracks. But the van was real. It lay at a jagged slant, its rear half still embedded in the soil. Time had warped the metal, corroded its windows, but the shape remained. A 12-passenger van, standard issue for the school back then. Claire's breath hitched as she saw the faded emblem still clinging to the side. Cascade Youth Performing Arts. The final curve of the S barely legible. A deputy approached her, young, unfamiliar. "Sheriff Moreno?" Or, "I'm not sheriff," she cut in quietly. "I'm just here." The foreman nodded her toward the open side of the van. "We cleared the front," he said, voice strained. "Didn't touch anything else. But there's something you need to see." Claire stepped up, her boots crunching damp earth. The van's door had been pried open, revealing the ghost of another time. Inside, dust clung like fog, rows of seats still intact. Some belts buckled as if waiting. On the third row's floor sat a pair of white ballet flats, one tucked under the other. A heavy breath escaped her lips. A pale pink notebook lay on the back seat, warped from moisture, the pages curled like petals. She reached out, brushing dirt away from the cover. There was a name scrawled in childish print. Ray W. Her pulse skipped. Ray Whitmore, one of the 12. Brilliant, defiant, a dancer who moved like she was trying to escape gravity. And then there was the camcorder, an old JVC handheld, half buried beneath a collapsed seat. She slid on gloves and retrieved it gently. It clicked faintly, as though recognizing her touch. They'd recorded all their practices back then, Claire remembered. Sometimes they reviewed tapes to refine movements, correct spacing. "This was sealed in mud," the deputy noted, "but the tape's still inside." Claire didn't answer. Her mind had gone somewhere else entirely. 1993, the rehearsal hall, Ray turning toward her in that final group practice with a grin and a whispered, "We'll dance like they've never seen before." Before she could speak, another officer called out, "We've got movement on the ridge, east side. Someone walking down." Claire turned sharply, adrenaline sharpening her edges. A searchlight cut through the trees. A woman stumbled into view. Barefoot, clothes tattered, her hair hung in matted curls around her face. and she was mouthing something over and over. Claire rushed forward. The woman collapsed into the deputy's arms. "Water," she rasped. "They said we'd forget. I didn't forget." Claire knelt beside her, lowering her voice. "What's your name?" The woman blinked slowly, her lips cracked, her skin pale, but her eyes, hazel, piercing, held something terrifying and whole. "I'm Ray," she whispered. "Ray Whitmore. I'm 17. Where's everyone else?" Claire stared. Ray had not aged like someone missing for 31 years. Her body was that of a woman in her late 30s, but her eyes, her soul, still carried the fear and confusion of a girl in high school. "I didn't forget," she repeated, more firmly this time. "They made us change names. They said if we remembered, they'd erase us again." The last word felt like a blade against the air. "Who said that, Ray?" Claire asked, voice barely audible. Ray's eyes drifted upward, glassy and haunted. "Father Ashen. He said we weren't dancers. We were vessels. And the performance was never meant for the audience. It was for them." Claire swallowed hard. A silence fell, too large for words. In the distance, the van's side creaked under the settling weight of soil, as if breathing out decades of held breath. Ray's head lolled to the side. "Do you remember the quiet room?" she whispered. Claire's blood ran cold. No one had spoken those words in 31 years. But she remembered it from a single offhand comment, long buried in a yearbook caption, the one thing Juliet Quinn had written under a photograph. Even silence has choreography. Claire stood slowly, staring at the van, then at Ray. The past had finally clawed its way back to the surface, and it was only just beginning. The hospital room was quiet, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. Ray Whitmore lay on the narrow bed, wrapped in a warm blanket, her arms trembling as if her body still hadn't decided whether it was safe to exist again. Claire Moreno stood on the other side of the glass, watching in silence. Nurses had done what they could. Hydration, warmth, observation. But Ray hadn't stopped whispering since she was brought in. Most of what she said didn't make sense to them. But to Claire, it was beginning to sound horribly familiar. A doctor approached her, clipboard in hand. "She's in physical shape consistent with her age, 30 to 35, he said. "But mentally, she keeps repeating that she's 17. We're considering dissociative identity trauma. Might be protective amnesia." Claire's eyes remained fixed on Ray's face. "She told me her name without hesitation," she murmured, "and she remembered something no one should have." "What's that?" the doctor asked. Claire didn't answer. She just stepped into the room. Ray's eyes snapped toward her the moment the door clicked shut. "You're her," she said hoarsely. "You're the one who didn't come." Claire approached slowly, pulling a chair beside the bed. "Claire Moreno," she said softly. "I was supposed to be number 13. Ray gave a small, trembling laugh, but it held no joy. "Lucky 13, she whispered. "You were the lucky one." Claire swallowed hard. "Ray, do you know what year it is?" Ray looked toward the window, where light pressed gently through the blinds. Her voice was careful, as if measuring each word. "It was 1993, she said. "We were headed to Eaglewood. We rehearsed the final piece for weeks. Father Ashen said it had to be perfect." Claire nodded slowly. "And what happened when you arrived?" Ray blinked. "We never did," she said. "That's the thing. We never got there." Claire felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. "The van?" "It turned," Ray said, "not toward Eaglewood. A different road. Smaller, gravel, trees too tight to see past. Then we stopped. The man outside had no face. I mean, he did, but none of us looked. We were told not to." "Who told you?" "Father Ashen. He said looking was breaking the rules, breaking the rhythm. That's what he always said. Keep the rhythm, keep the silence." Her fingers twitched atop the blanket. "He wore gray all the time. No color, no scent. He said color invited memory, and memory was danger." Claire felt her breath shallow. "Where did he take you?" Ray shook her head. "I don't know. We were blindfolded. We were not to speak real names. We were given roles." "Roles? Dancer, dreamer, watcher, listener. I was Echo. That's what they called me, because I was good at repeating things." Claire opened her notebook and gently placed a laminated sheet on Ray's lap. "Do you recognize this?" Ray's fingers moved over the page. It was a scanned class photo. 12 girls in black leotards and tights, standing in 2 lines. She pointed slowly. "That's Marin. She became Silence. And Avery, she was Bluebird. And me." Her finger hovered above her own younger face. Echo. Claire's pen tapped against the page. Did you ever see them again? Ray's voice grew faint. Some, at first. But we were moved, split up. Rehearsals got smaller. We weren't allowed to sleep near each other. If someone cried, they were taken to the quiet room. Claire stilled. What happened in the quiet room? Ray didn't answer. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. Claire waited, but the silence thickened. Ray's eyes shut tight as if trying to block out images that had no mercy. After a long pause, Claire rose to her feet. She placed her hand lightly on Ray's shoulder. You don't have to remember everything tonight. She stepped out into the hallway, body tense. She pulled out her phone and called the department. I need a team to pull every archived building permit filed near Eaglewood between 1980 and 1995, especially anything listed under private trusts or religious exemptions, and flag anything linked to the name Ashen. She hung up and moved down the corridor to the evidence room. The VHS tape retrieved from the van had been carefully dried and preserved. Claire inserted it into an old player set up by tech. The screen fuzzed, then cleared. The video was grainy, color muted, but unmistakable. 12 girls stood in a circle in a dark wooden room. No music, just the sound of breathing. One by one, they stepped forward, performed a single movement, then stepped back, over and over, as if caught in a loop. At the back of the frame stood a man. He didn't move. He watched. The timestamp read July 15th, 1993. Claire paused the tape and zoomed into the corner of the frame. A barely visible chalk mark on the floor read, Cassia. Claire sat back slowly. Cassia had not been on the official roster. Not one of the 12. A 13th name. One erased. And someone had written it in chalk, as if trying to leave a mark before vanishing completely. A soft knock pulled her back. A junior deputy stood at the door. Sheriff, sorry, detective. You'll want to see this. Someone just sent an anonymous envelope to the station. No return address, no fingerprints, but it contains a drawing. Claire opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, hand-drawn in charcoal. A girl running through the woods, her hair flying behind her. A ribbon trailing from her wrist. And at the bottom, scrawled in faint pencil, she ran so we could stay remembered. Claire traced the image slowly. Her heart beat like a metronome, echoing a choreography long forgotten. She whispered to herself, Cassia didn't forget, and someone made sure she wouldn't be the only one. Outside the hospital window, Ray stirred in her sleep, and for the first time in 31 years, she didn't dream of silence. She dreamed of footsteps, of someone coming back, of someone remembering her name, and somewhere far from town, deep in the Oregon woods, a wind passed through the trees like breath through old lungs, as if something buried had begun to exhale. The next morning, fog rolled over the Cascade foothills like a shroud pulling tighter around a forgotten wound. Claire Moreno sat alone at her desk, her fingers resting on the edge of the charcoal drawing. Cassia, sprinting toward a horizon no one else could see, the ribbon trailing from her wrist as if marking the air behind her with hope. The girl hadn't been on any official lists, hadn't been photographed in the group shots, hadn't been named in any testimonies, not even Ray's, and yet, someone had drawn her. Someone had sent the image now resting under Claire's steadying palm. The anonymity of the envelope gnawed at her. No return address, no handwriting to trace, no record of who had reached through time to hand her that ghost. Claire pulled out the class rosters again. 12 names, 12 files, all marked presumed deceased or lost. She flipped to the notes on Ray Whitmore's reappearance, now officially labeled recovered subject. She hesitated before adding a new page beneath it, one she titled in pencil only. Cassia, unlisted participant. She circled the name slowly, once, then twice. That afternoon, Claire returned to the van site. The team had fully excavated the vehicle. The ground beneath it had been compacted by years of sediment and tree growth. But what lay beneath the frame had everyone unnerved. A second layer of floorboards, custom-fitted over what used to be the van's emergency compartment. Hidden inside, a rusted tin box, locked. They had opened it at the station earlier that day. Inside were artifacts, a balled-up ribbon, stained but unmistakably red, a snapped mirror compact, and a photograph. One not found in any school archive. Claire had studied it for hours. It showed 13 girls, not 12. 12 in uniform black rehearsal wear, one at the far left in white. Her expression blurry from motion, her eyes cast sideways like she was already halfway out of frame. Scribbled on the back in delicate block print, "Last day before the silence. Cassia drew this. Cassia remembered." Claire now stood beside the excavated van, staring at the impression it left in the earth. The trees here grew in unnatural formations, bent slightly inward, as if trying to protect or contain what lay beneath. A forensic officer approached. "We found additional markings beneath the driver's seat, ma'am. Not sure if you want to see." Claire followed him to the frame of the front cabin. The seat had been removed entirely, exposing rusted metal and flaking padding. On the underside of the floorboard, someone had etched into the paint with what looked like a broken nail file. Claire crouched to read. The letters were crooked, desperate. "Don't follow the music. It's not yours." She stared at the message for a long time, heart pounding. Back at the station, she visited Ray again. The girl, no, the woman, sat curled up on the hospital bed, clutching a styrofoam cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes were clearer now, but still haunted. The kind of haunted that refused to be cured by hydration or rest. Claire sat down slowly. "I need to ask you something." Ray didn't look up. "Cassia," Claire said. "Do you know the name?" Ray flinched. Her grip on the cup tightened. "I thought she was a dream," she whispered. "They said she wasn't real. They said she was just a disruption. She kept drawing, even after they took away our sketchbooks. She'd etch things into the wood floors with hairpins, with charcoal from the fireplaces. When they found them, they locked her in the quiet room longer than anyone. But she always came back smiling, like she knew something we didn't." Claire leaned in. "Was she on the van?" Ray nodded slowly. "They made us forget. One by one, through rehearsal, through repetition. But Cassia danced out of rhythm, on purpose. She said, 'If I get out, I'll leave the light on.'" Claire pulled out the charcoal drawing. Ray's breath caught. "That's hers," she said, trembling. "That's how she drew herself. Always running, always just ahead of the silence." Claire hesitated, then unfolded the photograph from the tin box. Ray's face drained of color. "That was the last day," she whispered. "We had lunch near the edge of the trees. Cassia sketched something onto the side of the van before we left. It looked like a spiral, or maybe a fingerprint. She said it was how the forest would find us again if it had to." Claire's mind churned. A spiral. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a topographical map of the region surrounding Eaglewood. Her fingers scanned until they found it. A naturally occurring spiral-shaped rock formation near a glacial stream less than 4 miles from the excavation site, listed only as Mineral Feature Hash 228, a place locals called the Stone Nest. By dusk, Claire was at the trailhead. The path hadn't been maintained in over a decade. Thick brush clawed at her sleeves as she moved, and the air grew colder, denser, the deeper she went. The forest here felt different. Still, yes, but watchful. She reached the spiral formation just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The rocks curved inward like a sleeping creature's ribs. At the center stood an old wooden bench, weather-worn and cracked. On it, faint carvings barely legible in the dim light. We made it real by remembering. See. Claire stood in the silence, the wind threading through the trees like whispers, and then, just as she turned to leave, her flashlight flicked across something new. An object hidden behind a stone. She crouched, pulled it free. A child's music box, its surface etched with delicate dancing figures. Claire opened it. It didn't play a lullaby. It played a single repeating note, off-key, distorted, mechanical. But under the tone was something else, a whisper, barely audible, repeating. 3 words. "Still here, still here, still here." Claire snapped the lid shut, heart racing. Someone had left it here. Not 30 years ago, recently. Cassia may have vanished in 1993, but someone or something was still watching the rhythm, and it hadn't ended yet. Claire Moreno stood frozen in the dying light of the woods, the faint metallic whisper from the music box still echoing in her bones. Still here, still here. Not a lullaby, not a memory, but a message. She wrapped the box in a cloth and tucked it into her satchel before retracing her steps along the trail, every snapped twig beneath her boots sounding too loud, too deliberate, like someone, or something, was listening. Back at the station, night had fallen. She entered the evidence room alone, pulled the shades, and connected the music box's tiny recording strip to the department's archaic analog audio converter. The technician, young and unprepared for the kind of case this had become, had done what he could. The voice looped again, distorted, but undeniably human. A girl's voice, not Ray's. Too calm, too deliberate. On the fourth loop, it changed. Another line overlapped faintly beneath the primary whisper. Claire leaned in. He said only the empty ones survive. Then static. A skip. I tried to forget. It wouldn't let me. Claire's hands tightened around the desk edge. Whoever left this had come back here. Not just once, maybe recently, maybe often. She brought the tape to Ray the next morning. The woman sat cross-legged on the hospital bed, a sketch pad now in her lap, something the nurses had offered after seeing her repeatedly trace shapes onto the sheets with her fingernail. When Claire entered, Ray looked up, her face ashen, but expectant. "You found it, didn't you?" Claire paused. "Found what?" Ray tapped her temple. "The spiral. Cassia called it the echo shell. She said it was where the trees remembered things we forgot." Claire sat beside her and played the tape. Ray flinched at the sound. That's not me," she hesitated. "It's Bluebird. Avery Harrow." "She was one of the 12, Claire said. Ray nodded slowly. "They called her Bluebird because she hummed when she danced. They tried to break it out of her. Locked her in the quiet room for days. She came back empty. But I remember. She wasn't. She just pretended." Claire flipped to the files. Avery Harrow, age 16, last seen July 1993. Father deceased, mother institutionalized in 1995 after repeated claims that her daughter was trapped in the walls. Claire felt the chill move up her spine. "Do you think she's still alive?" Ray didn't answer. She only stared at her sketch pad, where a new image had emerged. A bird, wings spread, its head turned completely backwards. Claire left the hospital and drove straight to the Harrow estate, what remained of it. A crumbling Victorian on the outskirts of Alders Creek, shuttered since 1996. The front gate hung crooked on its hinges, vines swallowing the ironwork. Claire pushed through the overgrowth, boots crunching through wet moss and broken glass. The interior smelled of mildew and dust, but something else lingered underneath, a faint scent of chalk, like a dance studio forgotten by time. On the second floor, she found a child's bedroom preserved in a strange kind of stasis. On the mirror, long ago cracked, someone had written in red crayon, "The birds forget, but the sky remembers." Claire opened the closet door. It wasn't empty. A music stand, a metronome, a bundle of old rehearsal notes tied with blue ribbon. Beneath them, a notebook. Avery's. The first page was a scrawl of overlapping text. Repeat, obey, forget, repeat, obey, forget. But further in, the words changed. Cassia said remember. Cassia said run. Cassia said names are the only way out. Claire brought the notebook back to the station and laid it beside Ray's sketch pad. The overlap was undeniable. Symbols, loops, spiral patterns, and a recurring phrase in both. Room 0 doesn't lock from the outside. She called Juliet Quinn that night, the renowned choreographer now living in New York, who Claire had once suspected to be another missing girl. Juliet answered after 2 rings. "I've been waiting," she said softly. Claire's breath caught. "You remember?" "No," Juliet replied, "but I dream, and lately I see 12 girls dancing in a circle, and one always turns the wrong way. She reaches for me. I wake up choking." Claire hesitated. "You're not on the list, Juliet, but I think someone replaced you. A substitution. A name was removed, and yours was added." Silence stretched thin across the call. "I had a scar behind my left ear when I was a child," Juliet whispered. "No one could explain it. And sometimes I black out when I hear certain rhythms." Claire closed her eyes. "You might be Cassia." The line went quiet. Then Juliet said, "I'll come to Oregon." By the end of the week, forensic teams had returned to the van site. One of the crew uncovered a strip of fabric lodged deep in the tree roots beside the excavation trench. Red, satin, with initials stitched in pale thread. CL. Claire's heart thundered. Cassia Langston. A girl never enrolled, never registered, but somehow central to all of this. They ran her DNA through missing persons archives. No matches. It was as if she had been erased entirely. But Claire didn't believe in erasure anymore. Only silencing, only rewriting. That night, Claire revisited the drawing Ray had made, the bird with its head turned backwards, and noticed something she hadn't before. In the corner of the page, Ray had shaded in a shadow behind the bird. It wasn't just a shape, it was a face, almost human, with no mouth and too many fingers. Beneath it, in faint pencil, Ray had written, "Father Ashen watched every rehearsal, even the ones in our dreams." Claire leaned back in her chair, the fluorescent light above buzzing faintly, the clock on the wall ticking like a metronome that had no music to guide it. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of steps, full of breath, full of names trying to return to the surface. And somewhere beyond the reach of headlights and official records, someone else was still drawing, still remembering, still waiting to be found. Juliet Quinn arrived in Oregon under a sky the color of bruised ash, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her like an afterthought, as she stepped off the train and looked around with eyes that remembered without permission. Claire was waiting at the edge of the platform, a file tucked under her arm, watching the woman who might be Cassia Langston approach her as if crossing time itself. Juliet wore black, loose, quiet, neutral. But there was something in the way she walked, like she was always adjusting to music no one else could hear. They didn't speak until they were in the car, trees flanking them on both sides as the road narrowed toward the woods. "I know I've been here," Juliet said quietly, her fingers trembling in her lap. "Not just in dreams. I know the way the air smells here, like pine and old paper." Claire glanced over. "Do you remember Eaglewood?" Juliet nodded slowly. "I think there was a room underground, cold, with mirrors that didn't reflect anything. I think we were told the mirrors were for our own safety." Claire tightened her grip on the wheel. "There's a part of the camp that was never on the site plans, sealed off in 1994 after a mudslide. I had the permits pulled. It was listed as storage, but the foundation it sits on doesn't match the original build." Juliet looked out the window. "That's where I started forgetting, I think. Where they put the rhythms inside us." An hour later, they stood at the entrance of Eaglewood Retreat, or what remained of it. The main lodge was a sagging skeleton of timber and rot. Its roof collapsed in one wing, vines like veins twisting up its side. The forest had grown thicker since 1993, swallowing edges and blurring paths. Claire led Juliet behind the building, to a shed that had nearly disappeared beneath a wall of blackberry thorns. Inside, a trapdoor waited beneath a broken shelf. The hinges groaned when pried open, revealing a stairwell choked with dust and darkness. Juliet paused at the top. "Do you hear it?" Claire stilled. "What?" "There's no sound, not even wind, like it's waiting for us to breathe first." Claire flipped on her flashlight. "Then, we don't keep it waiting." The stairs led to a corridor lined with decayed insulation and warped paneling. At the far end stood a metal door with no handle, no hinges, just a flat seam set into concrete. Claire ran her hand across it. "It's not locked from this side," she murmured. Juliet stepped forward and placed her palm against the metal. It clicked. Slowly the door shifted inward with a hiss, revealing a room that stole the warmth from Claire's bones. It was round, windowless, low-ceilinged, and lined with small wooden desks. On the wall opposite the entrance, a mural had been painted, still shockingly vivid despite time. 13 figures stood in a circle, each faceless, their bodies stretched into impossible shapes. One figure was turned outward, running, ribbon trailing behind her. Juliet dropped to her knees. "I painted this," she whispered. "They let me paint because they thought I was compliant. But I left messages, in shadows, in shapes. I remember now." Claire stepped closer. "Which one are you?" Juliet reached up and traced the figure running out of the circle. "I'm the one who wouldn't face inward." They moved deeper into the room. At the center stood a small platform, its surface scored with scratches, names carved again and again, overlapping until they were almost illegible. But Claire caught a few. Bluebird, Dreamer, Echo, Silence, Obedience, Cassia. "These were the roles," Juliet said. "They said if we became the role, we'd be free of the burden of the self. They called it ascension." Claire's stomach turned. "Who were they?" "Only 2 we ever saw," Juliet said. "Father Ashen and the one called Matron. But there were voices above them. We heard them in the ceiling, watching, recording. There were more than 12 of us, you know. We weren't the first group." Claire froze. "What happened to the others?" Juliet closed her eyes. "Some forgot completely. They danced until they couldn't stand, then were taken. We were told they had matured, that they had been released into silence. She opened her eyes again. But some of us never forgot. That's why they isolated us. That's why they buried the van. Claire pulled out her notebook and flipped to the photograph found in the tin box, the one with 13 girls. She handed it to Juliet. Can you name them? Juliet nodded slowly, pointing to each in turn. Marin, Silence, Avery, Bluebird, Ray, Echo, Juniper, Obedience, Harper, Stillness, Isla, Reverie. She paused on the last figure, the one at the edge, blurred, turning away. And me, she said. But they didn't call me Cassia. They called me Discord, because I wouldn't fall in line. Claire's voice was quiet. And now? Juliet looked up. Now I call myself by the name I left behind. She stood slowly, walking to the back of the room, where a small wooden box had been bolted to the wall. Claire followed as Juliet pried it open. Inside were cassette tapes, labeled with symbols instead of names. Claire lifted one. What are these? Juliet's face was grim. Lessons. Induction sequences. They played them at night, over speakers hidden in the floor. Repetition, obedience, dissociation. Claire clutched the tape tighter. We're going to bring this to the state. Juliet touched her shoulder. You don't understand? The state already knew. Eaglewood received a private education grant in 1991 from a foundation with no traceable board. They were protected. Still are. Claire stared at her. Then, we bring the truth louder than they can silence. As they exited the room, Claire spotted something scrawled in the corner beneath the mural. A child's handwriting, jagged but clear. I remembered so you wouldn't have to. See. Juliet brushed her hand over the letters. She's still out there, she said. Cassia didn't die. They never could break her completely. She ran, and she's been leaving messages ever since. Claire nodded, her jaw set. Then we follow them. All of them. And in the silence that followed, for the first time, Claire felt the rhythm shift. Not the rhythm they had been forced to follow, but a new one, rising, made of names returned and memories unstolen. The storm rolled in just after midnight. Sheets of rain pelting the windows of the station. As Claire sat alone in the evidence room, the mural photograph laid beside a growing map of pins, dates, and names. She traced the thread from Eaglewood's sealed underground room to a second site Juliet had mentioned only once, a property owned by the same foundation that had funded the retreat, a location listed in an old grant report as Sanctuary North Observation Annex. No public record matched that name, but a deed from 1992, buried beneath layers of shell corporations, showed a remote facility 15 miles northeast, listed simply as a youth development center. Claire circled it in red. By morning, she and Juliet were on the road, headlights cutting through fog so thick it blurred the lines between past and present. The air grew colder as they climbed into higher elevation, the tree lines growing tight and suffocating. When they reached the gated path, the place looked long abandoned. Signs rusted, weeds swallowing the gravel lot, windows boarded from inside. But there were footprints. Fresh ones, smaller than an adult's. Claire reached for her sidearm. Someone's here, she murmured. They moved in silence toward the main structure. Juliet paused, her gaze locked on a mark above the rotted doorway. A spiral carved in wood, barely visible. Cassia's mark, she whispered. She's been here. Inside, the building smelled of mold, old power cables, and something faintly metallic, like rusted steel or dried blood. The floorboards creaked beneath their weight. Claire swept the beam of her flashlight across faded posters on the wall, silhouettes of dancers, motivational phrases in cursive fonts that no longer felt inspirational. They reached a long corridor where each door was numbered but unmarked. At the end of the hall, a single door stood ajar. Claire pushed it open slowly. The room inside was lined with cots, too small for adults, too rigid for comfort. Atop one lay a bundle of blankets, barely moving. Claire stepped forward. Hello? A voice replied, soft as paper tearing. You're late. Claire froze. The girl under the blanket sat up. Her face was gaunt, pale, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She looked no older than 12, but something in the stillness of her movements suggested otherwise. What's your name? Claire asked gently. The girl tilted her head. They called me Shade, she said, but that's not mine. Juliet stepped into the light. Do you remember your real name? The girl nodded slowly. Harper. Harper Lynn. Claire's throat tightened. Harper Lynn was declared dead in 1994. Her parents were told I drowned, Harper finished, her voice flat. They made them believe it, sent a bracelet, said they'd never recover the body. Claire knelt. How long have you been here? Harper looked toward the boarded window. I stopped counting at year 15. I think that's when the others stopped speaking too. Claire's voice dropped. Are there more of you? Harper didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood, moving toward the far wall. There, hidden behind a loose panel, was a small crawl space. Inside it, boxes of papers, cassette tapes, and sketches, hundreds of them, most crumpled or half burned. She pulled one out and handed it to Juliet. Cassia left these, she said. She came through 3 winters ago, stayed a night, said she couldn't take me yet but would leave a map. Juliet unrolled the drawing, a landscape of trees, shadows, and a small tunnel drawn beneath the roots of a lightning-struck tree. Beside it, a single phrase, not all roots stay buried. Claire stared at it. This tree, I've seen it, near the eastern ridge, along the storm-cut trail. They gathered the materials, Harper's feet bare against the cold floor, her movement stiff from years of confinement. Claire wrapped her in a coat and led her outside into the late afternoon light. Harper blinked against it, like a creature seeing the sun for the first time. At the car, she paused. There were others, she said quietly. Some still remember their names. Some don't. But they're not far. Claire turned. Where? Harper pointed toward the trees. They're underground, where the sound doesn't echo. That night, Claire reviewed every sketch Cassia had left. Each image was both art and clue, shapes formed out of movement, symbols hidden in posture. In one, a girl danced along a staircase carved into roots. In another, children sat in silence beneath a dome of iron, their names etched above them not in letters but in gestures. Juliet translated them one by one. These are the original 13, she murmured. Before even us, this program has cycles. Claire looked up. So Cassia wasn't the first. Juliet shook her head. She was the first to break the rhythm, the first to run and keep running. Claire exhaled slowly, and she's still leaving the trail. At dawn, they reached the tree, a massive cedar. Its trunk split down the middle, charred from a lightning strike that had carved a groove into the earth like a claw mark. Harper walked directly to it, dropped to her knees, and began clearing moss and stone from the base. Beneath it, a trap door. Iron, bolted shut with a rusted padlock. Claire pried it open with a crowbar, the metal shrieking like a thing in pain. A rush of cold air surged upward. The scent was unmistakable. Stagnant water, mildew, and the faintest trace of chalk. Claire looked to Harper, who only nodded once. This is where the others went. She paused. They called it the vault. Claire turned on her flashlight. The tunnel yawned before them, steep, carved into stone, its walls damp and tight. Are you ready? She asked. Juliet stepped beside her. We've been ready for 31 years. And as they descended into the dark, each step echoed not as noise, but as names clawing their way back into the world. The vault smelled like memory left to rot. As Claire, Juliet, and Harper stepped onto the slick stone stairs descending into the earth, the cold air coiled around them, heavy and unmoving, as though it had never been disturbed by breath or light. The flashlight beams shivered over rough walls etched with hand-carved markings. Scratches, symbols, rhythmic tallies, hundreds of them stretching down into the dark like a slow unraveling of time. No one spoke. Harper led the way without hesitation, her bare feet making no sound against the damp floor, as if her body still remembered how to exist in places where silence had once been mandatory. The tunnel curved downward for at least 50 feet before opening into a wide chamber, the walls smoothed unnaturally, almost surgically. Claire's light swept across what looked like a classroom frozen in decomposition, 15 desks in a perfect circle, small, bolted to the floor. At the center was a podium, but it wasn't a place for instruction. It was a pedestal, metallic and oddly clinical, fitted with restraints. Juliet moved forward, her fingers trembling as they passed over the desk nearest to her. A name had been scorched into the wood. Stillness. Claire approached another. Dreamer. Then another. Cassia. Juliet turned to her, eyes wide. They were training us to perform without identity. These weren't desks, they were stations, reprogramming cells disguised as art. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with binders, rows of thin black folders labeled only with numbers. Claire pulled one at random. Inside were pages of charts, diagrams, and typed phrases. Conditioning techniques masquerading as choreography notes. Movement repetition disconnects ego state. Break eye contact at count 5. Enforce reintroduction of assigned persona. A video monitor hung crookedly from the ceiling in one corner. Claire tried the switch beneath it. It sparked, then flickered to life with a static hiss before stabilizing on a grainy feed. Looped footage of children dancing silently, endlessly, inside this very room. But they were younger. 7, 8, maybe 10 years old. Their faces blurred, not from motion, but from intent. As though someone had erased them. Juliet stepped backward, her body rigid. "I remember this room now," she whispered. "They called it the archive. Not because they stored our work, but because they stored what we became." Harper had crossed to the far side of the room, where a door stood partially open. "There's another chamber," she said softly. Claire followed, her light slicing through the opening into a smaller space. Inside were cots, 12 of them, lined neatly, each with a trunk at its foot. One by one, Claire opened them. Each trunk contained identical items, gray uniforms, notebooks with lined pages, and a single item of color, bracelets, hair ribbons, a handkerchief. Evidence of lives before erasure. But the last trunk was different. Inside was a photograph. It showed a girl alone in the middle of the woods, hair wild, eyes narrowed at the camera. She was holding a sign. "This is not a performance. This is a warning." Juliet's breath caught. "That's Cassia. I took that picture." Claire turned. "What?" Juliet nodded slowly. "We were allowed outside once, briefly, supervised. They gave us disposable cameras to make it feel normal. She made me take that photo before they called us back. Said if I didn't remember it later, it wasn't real. But I do. I always have. I just never knew it meant something." Claire pocketed the photo and turned back to Harper, who had now crouched beside a corner panel near the floor. "There's something behind this," the girl said. Together they pried it open, revealing a crawl space lined with wires and narrow vents. Inside, they found a series of voice recorders, dozens, all tagged with dates from 1991 to 1993. Claire activated one. A child's voice crackled to life, shaky, barely above a whisper. "They say if we don't remember who we were, we'll never know what they did to us. But I remember. I remember Harper humming when she was scared. I remember Ray tapping her heel 3 times before every turn. I remember Cassia telling us to lie awake with our eyes open so our dreams couldn't be stolen. I remember." Claire turned off the recorder, her hands cold. "That's Bluebird," Harper whispered. "That's Avery. They said she vanished during a storm, but I think she escaped." Suddenly, a thump echoed above them, sharp, deliberate. Then another. Claire spun, flashlight pointed at the door. Juliet held up a hand. Footsteps, slow, measured. They waited, breath caught in their throats. A shadow passed across the stairwell entrance above. Then silence again. Harper pressed close to Juliet. "He used to walk like that. Father Ashen. You always heard him before you saw him." Claire approached the stairs, weapon drawn, steps quiet. But when she reached the entrance, no one was there. Just fresh footprints in the dust, small, adult-sized, and something else, scratched into the wall beside the stairwell exit. The vault remembers what the surface tries to forget. That night, back at the station, Claire cataloged everything they'd found. The tapes, the notebooks, the photograph. And on a blank page, she began writing each recovered name. Not the roles, but the real ones. Ray Whitmore, Harper Lynn, Avery Harrow, Cassia Langston, and one more. A new name. One not yet found, but written in a child's scrawl inside one of the journals, Jonah. He was the only boy, and he was always watching. Claire leaned back, staring at the name. "There was a boy?" Juliet nodded slowly. "He didn't speak much. They said he was part of the next cycle, but he disappeared before the rest of us." Claire circled the name, underlined it, and beside it wrote the question that had begun haunting her. How many more were there? The name echoed louder than any others, Jonah, not because Claire had heard it before, but because it had never been mentioned in any official report, any testimony, any archive. A name whispered only in the private margins of half-burned journals and scribbled drawings, a ghost threading through the story like someone who had watched the horrors unfold from the very edge of the spotlight. Claire stood over the evidence board in the sheriff's office as the sun began to rise, a dull glow pushing through the blinds. She had pinned the names of all 12 dancers, real names and roles, plus Cassia's photograph, plus the newly rescued Harper. And now, in red ink at the bottom corner, Jonah. The one who watched. Juliet had described him as small, silent, always observing, rarely participating in rehearsals, but always present at debriefs. They said he was in training for a different purpose, she had told Claire the night before, eyes hollow. Ashen called him our little archivist. Claire didn't know what that meant, but she knew one thing. If Jonah had been there, and if he had survived, he might know what even Cassia hadn't lived long enough to write down. Claire ran a state-level scan through juvenile records from 1985 to 1995 for any boys named Jonah placed in specialized educational or behavioral programs, cross-referencing with the grant-linked foundations that had funded Eaglewood. Most were dead ends, but one stood out. A 1993 intake file from a now-defunct private cognitive immersion initiative in Washington state, labeled only as Project Orchard, showed a boy named Jonah Reeve, age 9, with no parental records transferred from an unnamed satellite facility. The intake report noted a peculiar trait: displays advanced recall abilities under silent observation, responds poorly to music or rhythm, refuses to participate in physical synchronization exercises. Claire stared at the file. It was dated August 12, 1993, 3 weeks after the dancers disappeared. Juliet's voice echoed in her mind. He didn't dance. Claire made calls. The building that once housed Project Orchard had burned down in 2002. No survivors. No records. But a local utility worker remembered a name. There was a quiet kid used to come around after the fire, he said. Moved into one of the trailers east of town. Name was Jonah. Never talked much. Lived off the grid. Claire followed the trail to a remote strip of forest trailers along the Washington-Oregon border. The place was crumbling, old mailboxes, hand-painted lot numbers, tarps for roofs. The address the utility worker gave led to a trailer sunken on one side, partially buried by blackberry vines. Claire approached cautiously, knocking twice. Silence. Then a voice, low, calm even, called from inside. "I knew you'd come." She entered slowly, one hand near her weapon, the other raised. The interior was dim, lit only by the gray of a cloudy morning filtering through plastic-covered windows. Books lined every wall: psychology, memory theory, trauma reprogramming. At the center of the room sat a man, early 40s, gray-streaked hair, thin frame, hands folded on a worn chessboard. He looked up. His eyes were sharp, but not surprised. "Jonah Reeve?" Claire asked. He nodded once. "You're looking for the ones who weren't meant to be remembered." Claire sat across from him, watching every subtle movement. "You were there. Eaglewood, the vault, the archive, all of it." He blinked slowly. "I was the observer, the control variable. They wanted to see how much memory could be preserved when the subject was never immersed in performance. I was the measure of silence." Claire's skin prickled. "And the girls?" Jonah's gaze didn't waver. "They were not trained to perform. They were trained to obey. Performance was the surface. They buried obedience beneath it." He reached beneath the table and pulled out a wooden box. Inside were photographs. Dozens. Some Claire recognized, young faces, wide-eyed and vacant, but others were unfamiliar, older, from years after 1993. "The project didn't stop," Jonah said. "It just evolved, moved, fragmented. Silence is easier to hide than screams." Claire picked up one photo, a girl standing in front of a concrete building with no windows, holding a sketch pad. In the corner, written in faded pencil, "Echo Seksu." Claire looked up. "They made more?" Jonah nodded. "Each generation more refined, less resistant. By 1999, they didn't need names anymore, just numbers." Claire felt the ground shift beneath her. "Where are they now?" Jonah reached for a tattered notebook beside the chessboard. "Some are gone, some are still underground, but one—" He tapped the last page. "One is awake. One has been leaving messages." Claire leaned in. The page showed a single image. Cassia, older, her hair streaked with gray, standing beside a river marked on a local topographical map. "That was 3 months ago," Jonah said. "I didn't follow. I thought if she made it, she'd come back for the rest." Claire swallowed. Then we need to find her. Jonah shook his head. She doesn't want to be found. She wants the others to be remembered. I think she's leaving the trail because she knows she won't last. As Claire stood to leave, Jonah called out, "There's something else." He walked to a back room and returned with a single audio reel. She recorded this before she vanished, said it was for the girl who never danced. Claire took the reel with shaking hands. On the drive back, she played it. The voice was unmistakable, older, weathered, but it was her, Cassia. "If this reaches you," she said, then the archive broke. The rhythm cracked, and silence bled memory back into the world. But they're still down there, beneath the new camps, in the garden. The place they said we'd graduate to once we forgot enough to be trusted. Her voice trembled. I didn't forget, so I was never allowed in. But I listened, I mapped. And if you follow the river east, you'll find the red gate carved into the stone. That's where they left the ones who never broke. Claire looked up at the road ahead, her mind racing. Ray, Harper, Jonah, Cassia, and now, the garden. Another name, another chamber, another silence waiting to be broken. Claire drove through the pine-walled back roads of eastern Oregon, each mile taking her farther from cellular reach and closer to the raw, untouched wilderness Cassia had described in her final recording. The air was colder here, sharper, as if the land itself still remembered what had been buried beneath it. In the passenger seat, Jonah sat silently, his eyes fixed not on the road, but on the notebook in his lap. Cassia's map of the river trail, marked with handwritten symbols only a survivor could have drawn. Behind them, Harper and Juliet followed in a second vehicle, bringing supplies and something else Claire hadn't told them yet. An underground sonar scanner, recovered from the county's emergency department, now modified to detect empty pockets beneath bedrock. As they crossed a rust-colored bridge spanning the Deschutes River, Jonah lifted his hand. "Slow down," he said. "That ridge." Claire stopped the car. To their left, a jagged outcrop of stone rose from the ground, scarred with deep lines that looked almost like claw marks. "There," Jonah whispered. At the base of the cliff was a rusted metal gate, half buried, painted long ago in a red, so deep it had turned black with time. The gate had no handle, only a keyhole and a spiral etched in the middle. Juliet approached carefully, fingers tracing the symbol. "Same mark as Eaglewood," she said. "This isn't new." Harper knelt beside the stone and brushed away the moss. Underneath, faint letters carved by a trembling hand. "Forget, and you enter free." Claire turned to Jonah. "What happens if we remember?" Jonah didn't answer. Instead, he pressed his hand to the spiral, and the stone behind the gate shifted with a low rumble. It wasn't magic. It was mechanism. A hidden latch inside the rock clicked, and the gate creaked open, revealing a cold tunnel descending into silence. They entered with flashlights, the beam dancing over mineral-streaked walls and exposed pipework. This wasn't a natural cave. It was man-made, reinforced decades ago, perhaps even before Eaglewood. As they descended, they passed murals, dozens of them. Childlike at first, stick figures, suns, spirals, but then more refined, darker. Eyes without faces, mouths without voices, bodies floating. Claire's breath caught when she saw a familiar image. A girl suspended mid-leap, arms wide, head tilted back, but her feet were shackled to the floor. Juliet stared. "That's from our performance book, the cover illustration." Jonah nodded. They didn't draw that for aesthetics. They drew what they remembered. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, larger than any they'd seen. Circular, with 12 stone benches around the perimeter and a pool of water in the center. Floating in the pool were flowers, dozens of them, all plastic, all gray. Claire stepped forward. "What is this?" Jonah's voice was barely audible. "The garden." They explored the chamber in silence. Juliet found a small drawer built into one of the benches. Inside were medical charts, notes on hormone regulation, REM sleep interruptions, and sound deprivation protocols. Harper discovered a drawer filled with audio tapes labeled by number only. Claire examined the pool's edge and found embedded speakers beneath the water's surface. "They played sound from below," she murmured. "Sleep music, indoctrination layered underwater." But then Harper called out, her voice sharp. "Someone's been here recently." She held up a thermos, still warm. Claire's pulse jumped. Then someone might still be here. They fanned out, checking each alcove. One held a writing desk with pages strewn in a circle, scrawled in frenzied handwriting. I didn't forget, I never forgot. I stayed still and they never saw me. I buried their names in me so they couldn't erase them. Another page. Cassia said we'd bloom again, but no one grows in the dark. Then Claire found it. A narrow tunnel, almost hidden, behind a loose slab of stone. She squeezed through first, the air growing colder with every step. The path opened into a small room lined with beds, 6 of them occupied. Girls, pale, eyes closed, breathing shallow. Wires ran from ports in the walls into headsets fitted tightly over their ears. Juliet rushed in behind Claire, gasping. "They're alive." Harper entered next, tears filling her eyes. "That's Ellie." "That's sorry." Claire ripped the headset from the nearest girl, and she flinched violently, gasping like someone dragged from the bottom of a lake. Her eyes flew open. "No more songs," she whispered. "Please, not again." Claire dropped to her knees beside her. "You're safe now. You're not alone." The girl reached up with trembling hands and pressed her fingers to Claire's lips. "Shh, they hear when you speak names." Juliet and Jonah worked quickly to shut down the power conduit, while Harper soothed the other girls one by one. As the final headset was removed, they stirred, confused, disoriented, but breathing. Then Claire noticed something. One bed was empty, neatly made, untouched. Above it, scrawled on the wall in charcoal, was a single phrase. "The boy with no rhythm is the one who dances last." Claire turned to Jonah. "It's you." He stared at the bed, unmoving. "They left that for me." Claire shook her head. "Why?" Jonah stepped forward slowly. "Because I still remember the final movement, and if I show it to the others, they'll wake fully." Claire looked at the rescued girls. "Then do it." Jonah walked to the center of the room, and in absolute silence, he began to move, each motion precise, deliberate, but hauntingly mechanical, as if programmed long ago. As he danced, the air seemed to tighten. The girls sat up straighter, their eyes cleared, and one by one, they began to move too, not perfectly, not uniformly, but with memory. Juliet whispered, "He's teaching them how to break the rhythm from inside." When Jonah stopped, the silence was no longer hollow. It was full of breath, of choice, of presence. Claire looked around the room, 12 girls awake, trembling but alive. One boy who had never danced, finally stepping into the center, and the garden that had never grown flowers had finally bloomed with memory. The climb back toward the surface felt heavier than the descent. Claire could feel it in her legs, her lungs, her very heartbeat, as though the garden's soil, thick with memory and silence, tried to pull every step backward. The 12 girls, still groggy, leaned on one another, guided by Juliet and Harper through the winding tunnels, whispering half-remembered songs and names as though speaking them aloud would risk vanishing again. Jonah remained at the rear, silent but alert, his eyes constantly flicking behind them. Claire's flashlight beam skimmed the walls, now marked with fresh streaks of chalk, arrows, spirals, symbols that hadn't been there before. Someone else had walked these tunnels since they entered. Claire raised her hand to stop the group, and the air froze. From far behind them, a faint scraping echoed, metal dragging across stone, slow and deliberate. Claire motioned to Jonah, who nodded. "They were always listening," he whispered, "not with microphones, with watchers." They moved faster, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. When they reached the main chamber again, the garden's heart, it looked different. The gray plastic flowers were gone. In their place stood 12 identical dolls, arms outstretched, eyes painted black. At their feet were laminated photos. Each of the girls, as they looked now, taken only hours earlier. Juliet gasped. "That's my face from this morning." Claire turned. "We're not alone." A sharp sound rang out. One of the hidden speakers beneath the water had activated, playing a new message in a calm male voice. "Reintroduction protocol initiated. Performance breach logged. Commence reclamation." Claire grabbed her radio. "No signal," she said, pressing the button again and again. The tunnel back through the red gate had closed. "There's another way out," Jonah said, moving quickly toward the chamber wall. "It's sealed, but Cassia told me if we ever needed it, it was behind the mirror that lies." Claire scanned the room. On the far end, a sheet of mirrored steel reflected their group, but the image was wrong. Their positions reversed, details missing. She stepped forward, pressed her hand against it. It rippled, not glass, smart polymer. Jonah found a panel nearby and yanked it loose, revealing a keypad. It's a pattern code, not numbers. Harper stepped up. Try the rhythm Cassia taught us, the one she whispered at night. Together, Harper and Juliet tapped out the sequence on the mirrored surface. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. The wall groaned and split down the center, revealing a narrow passage that sloped sharply upward, lined with grated flooring and flickering red lights. Go! Claire yelled, her voice echoing. The group ran, boots and bare feet slamming against metal, as behind them, the dolls in the chamber began to move. Not walk, not crawl, but tilt violently forward and crash one by one onto the stone floor, each impact followed by a burst of static from the speakers. Juliet screamed. They're setting the chamber to reset! They're going to bury it again! Jonah grabbed one of the girls who had stumbled. Faster! The passage twisted upward for what felt like hours, the ceiling pressing tighter, the lights dimming as the air grew hotter. Finally, a sliver of natural light, golden and distant, appeared ahead. Claire surged forward, shoulder-checking the rusted door at the end of the tunnel. It burst open into blinding daylight. They tumbled out into a dry ravine, miles from where they'd entered. Behind them, the hill they'd emerged from shuddered, and slowly the tunnel mouth collapsed inward, burying itself in dust and roots. Claire turned, counting heads. 12 girls, Juliet, Harper, Jonah, all present, all breathing. She radioed the station. This time, a crackled reply. Sheriff, we've got multiple helos inbound. You've been dark for hours. What's your status? Claire looked at the others. Alive, she said, but it's not over. At the county emergency shelter later that evening, doctors evaluated the girls. Severe malnourishment, minor atrophy, but miraculously all coherent. Yet none of them would speak of the garden, not yet. Claire and Juliet sat beside Ray Whitmore, who now seemed to remember everything. We thought we were asleep, Ray said softly, but we were just waiting for someone to listen. Jonah remained outside, alone on the porch, staring into the forest. Claire joined him. You knew this wasn't the end, Jonah nodded. Cassia didn't leave just breadcrumbs, she left a warning. He handed her the last page of Cassia's notebook. It showed a map, not of Oregon, but of California. A coastal region marked with the same spiral symbol. Below it, written in smeared ink, the fourth cycle begins, 2024. Claire felt her stomach turn. They moved again. Jonah met her eyes. This was only one garden. The others learned from it. In the distance, the 12 girls sat in a circle on the shelter lawn, humming the old lullaby in perfect harmony. Not because they were told to, but because for the first time in 31 years, they remembered who they were and chose to sing. 3 days after the rescue, the headlines had reached every major outlet. 12 girls found alive after 31 years underground. Dancer cult tied to elite arts program. And the most chilling of all, they never stopped watching. The public exploded in grief, fury, and disbelief. But for Claire, it wasn't over. The garden might have collapsed, but the system that created it pulsed on in shadows. She knew because her phone had started ringing from numbers with no caller ID. Because a black SUV with no plates had parked outside her apartment for 2 nights straight. And because when she called federal agencies for help, half the lines had been reassigned. Jonah had vanished from the shelter without a word, just left a torn page from Cassia's journal taped to Claire's door. A sketch of a massive spiral drawn around a map of Point Reyes, California. Next to it, no one forgets when they're built to remember. Claire knew what it meant. This wasn't over. The garden was one of many, and the one still active had evolved, cloaked behind grant-funded arts labs, wellness retreats, and memory enhancement clinics. Juliet stayed behind with the girls, now being quietly relocated to a safe house run by trauma specialists under assumed names. Ray, Harper, and Eli had regained fragmented memories, mostly in dreams. Cold water, ceiling lights shaped like eyes, whispers that spoke not in words, but pulses of sound. They never hit us, Ray told Claire. They just kept making us perform until we didn't know where we ended and the music began. Meanwhile, Cassia's death had triggered its own investigation. Her real identity had been buried under at least 5 aliases, but all connected to one defunct nonprofit, the Ashen Foundation for Immersive Arts, shuttered in 1994, but still receiving passive government payouts until 2007. The founder of the foundation? A man named Father Ashen. No birth certificate, no known residence, but countless photos placing him at every elite arts retreat between 1982 and 1993. In every image, he stood behind the performers, never smiling, always observing. Claire pushed harder. Through encrypted files recovered from a now-retired archivist, she uncovered something that made her blood freeze. The Spiral Directive, an internal program initiated in 1989 under a DoD sub-branch labeled Behavioral Precision and Symbolic Memory Encoding. It wasn't just about art. It was about obedience through aesthetics. If they could program children to move in unison, to silence their instincts through rhythm, they could build something more durable than soldiers. They could build silence itself. In one briefing memo stamped Classified, Level 3, the project described its ultimate goal: to create a generation whose compliance cannot be extracted through confession, only through performance. Claire looked at the list of trial sites. Eaglewood was one, the Garden was another, but 5 were still listed as active. And the last line of the memo read, Cycle 4 begins Q4 2024, Pacific Region. She knew what she had to do. Claire called Juliet, told her to keep the girls off-grid. Then she drove to California, following Cassia's map. The location was Point Reyes, but the coordinates pointed to a decommissioned naval radar station on a hill overlooking the sea. When she arrived, the gate was unlocked, the fence rusted. A white sign had been hastily posted near the entrance. Echo Vision Retreat Center, Art Heals. Inside, she found everything too polished. Stone paths, glass meditation domes, children's voices faintly heard through the trees. But there were no children, only speakers, playing looped laughter. Claire followed the sound to a glass building at the center of the property. There, a receptionist in pale gray welcomed her. "You must be here for the performance therapy consultation," she said. Claire nodded slowly. "I'm here for Cycle 4. The receptionist froze. Then she smiled. "Of course. Father Ashen is expecting you." Claire was led through a narrow corridor lined with framed photos, none older than 5 years, all of smiling teens mid-dance. But their eyes told a different story, hollow, like Ray's, like Juliet's. At the end of the corridor was a door without a handle, just a retinal scanner. The receptionist turned to Claire. "He's very particular about who he lets in." Claire reached into her coat slowly, then faster than the woman could react, pinned her to the wall. "Where are the children?" The woman's smile never faltered. "They're learning." Claire shoved past her, and the door clicked open on its own. Inside stood a room of mirrors. 12 girls in gray stood silently in the center, moving in perfect unison to a music only they could hear. And behind them, at the control panel, stood Father Ashen, older now, white hair, same hollow stare. "You broke one chamber," he said calmly, "but this performance has just begun." Claire raised her voice. "You buried 12 children alive. You twisted art into a weapon." Ashen stepped forward. "I offered them purpose. And now, they offer obedience to the world that refuses to listen." Claire took one step toward him, and the girls all turned in unison, eyes open, lips parted. And then, they began to sing. Not a lullaby, a command. And suddenly, Claire realized the music wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from them, from their lungs, their memories, their programming. She backed away, breath shaking. The real war hadn't been 30 years ago. It was now. And it was still singing dot. The sound coming from the 12 girls wasn't like any melody Claire had ever heard. It wasn't a song, not really. It was layered, fractured, bending tonality and rhythm into something almost alive. It struck her in the chest like a physical weight, vibrating against her ribs, her spine, her memories. Father Ashen stood among them, hands raised like a conductor, not of music, but of obedience. "They are the future," he said softly. "The art form beyond comprehension. Souls designed for resonance, not rebellion." Claire tried to shout over the sound, but no one could hear her. Not the girls, not even herself. The air inside the mirrored chamber had become elastic, warped by the psychic resonance of 31 years of buried identity rising in organized defiance. Claire stepped forward anyway. Her voice had saved others before. It would not fail now. "You are not your rhythm," she shouted, not with volume but intent. "You are not your silence. You are not what he made you." And one of the girls, Ellie, blinked, staggered half a step off beat. It was small, but it was a crack. And cracks were how sunlight got in. Father Ashen's eyes flared, and he snapped his fingers. The mirrored walls darkened, and synthetic strobe lights activated from above, sending harsh pulses to confuse the senses. Their minds are more disciplined than your words, he hissed. But Claire didn't need discipline. She needed memory. She reached into her coat and pulled out the music box, the same one recovered from the garden, the one that had whispered Ray's real name. She opened it, letting the worn tune play into the chamber. It was off-key, imperfect, human. Ray had said the system only functioned in perfect rhythm. This was dissonance, raw, vulnerable, and it was working. One by one, the girls stopped moving. Their mouths closed, their eyes blinked, not in sequence but independently, like individuals, like people. Ashen stepped backward, panic creeping into his carefully composed face. "No," he said. "No, no, no. They are the song. They are the silence." But Claire saw it then. Not a man, not even a visionary. Just a frightened old zealot who had built a religion out of control and masked it as art. Eli walked toward Claire, then Harper. Juliet came next, arms open, leading Ray forward. "You remember us?" Ray whispered. "You said our names when we couldn't." Behind them, the mirrored chamber fractured. One of the girls had thrown a stone sculpture into the wall, shattering it into 1,000 shards. Claire grabbed Ashen by the collar and shoved him toward the center of the room. "This time," she said, "you dance." He stumbled, surrounded now by the 12 he once manipulated. And then, for the first time, they began to move. Not in uniform rhythm, but in a beautiful chaos. Each girl danced her own story. Pain, memory, resistance, joy. And as they moved, Ashen shrunk. His control, once absolute, dissolved in the presence of the very thing he tried to kill: individual will. When federal agents, tipped by Juliet and the encrypted files Claire uploaded hours earlier, burst into the retreat center, they found him collapsed on the floor, muttering patterns to no rhythm at all. The rescue went global. The truth broke headlines. Operation Spiral was exposed, congressional hearings followed, and 5 more sites were quietly dismantled within weeks. Survivors from the Eaglewood group testified, bravely, haltingly, but this time in their own words. Not one of them agreed to be photographed in uniform. They wore their own clothes, their own scars. They stood shoulder to shoulder. And when asked how they survived, Ray looked directly into the camera and said, "We remembered our names." Jonah, now living under a new name in Santa Fe, mailed Claire a final package months later, a single photograph. It showed all 12 girls, standing in the sunlight outside the safe house, smiling. Not perfectly, not rehearsed. Real. Behind them stood a mural they had painted together, a spiral unraveling into open sky. Beneath it, written in thick brushstroke, was one sentence: "We are not choreography. We are memory." Claire quit her job after that, moved north, wrote a book, not about the conspiracy, but about survival, about the human will to emerge from silence louder than any rhythm. The world changed slowly, as it always does. But in dance schools across the country, instructors began ending every lesson not with bows, but with something far more sacred: the names of the students, spoken aloud, remembered. And on the 32nd anniversary of the day they disappeared, the 12 girls, now women, gathered on a hill overlooking where the garden once was. No cameras, no press, just memory, just movement. And in the wind, no longer forced to listen, they danced. Their own way, together, unbroken,